Hi everyone. So a couple of days ago, I put out on my social media, how's everyone feeling? Because obviously there is so much going on right now. There's a lot to people to learn. There's a lot to get the head round, and there's a lot to understand. And some of it's all very new to some people, and some people are like, "Oh God, here we go again." So I just put out a little message, and as you all know, I'm really active on my social media at the moment with everything that's going on in Delhi. Um, so I just put out a little message just to say, how's everyone feeling? How are you feeling? And I've had a lot of responses. So I've had responses in public on social media, on the sites, you'll see the comments. And I've had a lot of people inboxing me saying, thanks for asking. And it's such a small thing, but we often don't take stock of how we're feeling. We just roll with it, and we don't actually take a minute just to think, well, how is this affecting me? What does this mean for my mental health? What does it mean for those around me? So there is a lot going on. So I'm really lucky that I've been able to reach out to some people that we knew in Canada who run SOCH Mental Health, and the link's up on the site, so you'd be able to go on there and have a look at their social media sites and their website. So we're really lucky today that they've agreed to just come on and do a little bit about mental health, well-being, what to expect, how to look after yourself, and really it's okay, to feel as you are. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce them, and then hopefully, the few minutes that we do this, it will be really useful for someone, and it will help people just get their head around what they're going through. So with us, we have Maneet Chahal and Jasmeet Jagger, who are co-founders of SOCH Mental Health. Both these guys are experienced mental health nurses, so they know what they're talking about. So welcome, guys, and how are you?
Thank you, Val, for reaching out to SOCH and bringing us on. I think in the conversation, when we started our work with our initiative, a lot of people wonder, right? Like, mental health doesn't impact me. I'm not impacted by mental illness. There's so much stigma attached with it. I know from our experience, as soon as we say the word mental health, people are like, मैं पागल नहीं हैगी, या मैं पागल नहीं हैगा, ਅਸੀਂ ठीक हाँ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ नहीं करना चाहते. But I think just for the exact reason you're bringing us on the call today, mental health impacts all of us globally, right? I know Jasmeet and myself are sitting here in Canada, but we can speak for the community here in Canada that are really impacted by what's happening back home in India. And, that is a very relevant topic. And, in relation to that, if we also think of COVID, which has been happening since March, that's impacted our global community. So we know when there's things happening around the world, it doesn't matter where you are, whether it's happening, in your house, or it's happening in your community, or it's happening, around the world, it impacts us. So for that, I think, just as our basic conversation to start, for everyone to know that we all have mental health. And that doesn't mean that we're boggle, right? It means we're human beings. We have emotions. We get impacted by our circumstances. Some of that is in our control. Some of it isn't. And we need to start the conversation to learn how to manage our emotions and manage our mind, which is a big part of our health and wellness. We always ignore our brain for some reason, right? It's so easy to say, my body's hurting, I have aches and pains, I'm not feeling well. But we say like दिमाग ਦੀ ਸਿਹਤ ਬਹੁਤ important ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ, ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਆ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰੀਏ. So thank you. I think, just to start that conversation with everyone, start with accepting you have mental health. And I think that is the first stepping stone. And we'll dive into the conversation further, but we're really pleased to start this conversation with everyone.
Lovely, thank you. And Jasmeet, again, thank you so much for taking the time out. I know it's in the middle of a weekday for you guys, and it's all very short notice that you've agreed to take this time out to record this. So thank you very much.
Of course.
And
no, anytime. an opportunity to talk about mental health. I think just talking about it, bringing that awareness, especially in Punjabi, in our language, it's so important because, like Maneet said, there's a huge stigma around it, and we need to break these barriers. And the first part is to actually have a conversation, right? Get that dialogue started, whether it's in your own home, within your family circle. It really starts with us, right? Like before we change anyone else's SOCH, we need to change our own SOCH about how we view our own mental health. So we're really glad to be here.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. And when we talk about mental health, it doesn't always mean ill mental health, does it? It can be just your general well-being, like we exercise and take care of our physical well-being. The mental health is just as important as well. So just focusing on what is happening in Delhi at the moment. So as we all know, it's the biggest protest in history, and some of the images that are coming out are all very positive, and people are feeling very elated. The unity of people coming together from different states, where I think over the last few decades we've seen the politics of divide and rule, and people are being separated based on faith. At the moment, people are really celebrating the fact that people from all faiths are together and they're united by this cause. And the concept that we have in Sikhis is Jaddi Kala, that's very much there. It's freezing cold nights, probably the coldest time of the year. We have people sleeping out, people that would otherwise be in very nice warm beds in their homes with their family, they're sleeping out. But still, that concept of Jaddi Kala and, we're in this together, it's keeping them going, which is great to see. But there's always a downside to that as well, isn't there? When the adrenaline wears off and when the reality of where we are with the whole situation hits. What are your thoughts on that? How do you think that would impact mental health?
So definitely for sure we agree with what you're saying, right? The concept of Jardli Kala can also be applied to our mindset right now when it comes to mental health and the unity that we're seeing, right? So like you said, we're seeing the unity in India, even here, people are coming together for a really great cause and they're protesting and they're taking a stand. And that can also be applied to our own mental health, right? Like whenever we have any challenges, whenever we're going through a difficult time, we don't have to go through that on our own. And I think that's where that stigma with mental health lies, that I'm the only one that's going through this. You might feel embarrassed. There's sharmindagi that you might feel, and you don't want to talk to anybody about it. But if we apply that same unity to mental health and starting that conversation, I think it can really go a long way because every single person has mental health. Just like Maneet said, and just like you said, right? You have to take care of your physical body. We have to go to the doctor. We have to eat well, drink 8 glasses of water, exercise. So if we can take care of our body, we also need to take care of our mind, which includes talking to our family and friends about it, normalizing that conversation, and actually asking, hey, how's your mental health? Which is a very bizarre concept, we understand, if you've never spoken about it. But we encourage you, actually ask your family and friends, hey, how's your mental health going? And I think having these conversations is how you can actually start to bring unity into your own life, into your own circle, into your own family and friends to normalize and destigmatize the topic about talking about what's going on in our heart as well as in our mind.
So, Monique, what do you think in terms of some of our younger generation that are witnessing this? Here in England, certainly, it's a sense of, wow, let's go out there and there's a cause and it's for our people. And they might not understand the entirety of why they're out there or, the history behind why we're out protesting now. And some of them might not know the previous struggles of the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s for Punjab, for instance. But they're loving the fact that we're out there, we're together. What do you think could impact their mental health, and what do you think they might be going through?
I think like I'm really glad that you brought that up. So like, I can speak for myself, like being Canadian born, my parents and my family have like, their part in having me connected with my roots and my culture. But even when the protests were starting, like a lot of the history and the details, I don't know as much as my parents would know or my families know and those around me. But I think, being a member of the community, and I think it's the time of social media, there is so much information that's out there and it's igniting passion in individuals to find a cause. And I think especially during the time of COVID, we're so isolated, we're so disconnected. And I found like, when the protests started, it was bringing the different generations together. Like I was having conversations with my family to understand more of our history and, the history of the farmers and what's happening. And I mean, I want to be honest, like I'm kind of learning as I go. And I think that's okay too, because sometimes I think we turn to ourselves like we want to support a cause, but we don't know where to go. And I think the biggest problem with that kind of ends up being finding credible information. A lot of times there is an overload of information that's on social media, different networks, even through SOCH, we're learning. Sometimes we share something, a community member might reach out and say, actually, this is not true, or this is the other side of the story. So I think as youth, we're impacted in a way where we want to support the cause, but we may not necessarily know true facts. And I think being youth, sometimes your peers may look to you and kind of single you out for an approach you're taking. You can feel pressure that way. So that can kind of burden your mental health. But I think like, when I think of youth, and how they're impacted, I would actually take a step back and look at our community and how we're impacted within a community, because our South Asian community, we're very well connected. We're interconnected, right? And I know, when we were initially talking about, bringing more spotlight to mental health with the farmers, with the protests, we talked about intergenerational trauma. And, the interesting thing is that people's experiences are passed down in their DNA. And, this increases your risk to certain situations. It increases your risk factors for mental health. And it's so interesting that, our ancestors, what they went through back home to get their land, to get their rights, and what they're fighting for today, this gets passed down to generations. And the most important thing, sometimes when we're going through these global situations and we're going through these global climates, it can bring up unresolved concerns that we might have. If you are, for instance, a youth who is, really invested now, you want to support the cause, but now you're having a sense of burnout, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling unmotivated, you're kind of feeling hopeless, because I know we're seeing stories of Chardi Kala and we're seeing stories of people coming together, but then we're seeing stories of, farmers being impacted by suicide. We were speaking about a Babaji in India who died by suicide, during this time. And there's a lot of darkness that comes during the time of a protest. Of course, it's such a powerful cause. You want to be behind it, but you can quickly feel depleted and feel hopeless. And I think in that, Jasmine talked about is first accepting that we have mental health and talking about it. And in togetherness, we can't erase feelings of feeling disheartened or disappointed. I mean, we have to ride the wave. Sometimes there are certain situations that we're in and they're so tragic that we have to sit with that pain, and that pain helps us grow, but we need to know how to cope. And I think coping is so important. We're not resorting to unhealthy coping. For instance, we're not following a routine. It's the time of COVID where we're not going out for a walk. We're neglecting our physical health, our nutrition. We're being consumed in the news 24/7. And I understand the importance of being informed, but if the first thing you do in the morning, you wake up, you go on social media and you start scrolling for hours and hours, it's going to have a really negative impact on your mind. Myself being sick and also really exploring my spirituality, Jasmine and I in our platform encourage for a balance. So we're very intentional with, starting our morning in a way you have a spiritual practice or you have a mindful practice. You kind of, find ways to detoxify all this information that's out there. And then when you are reaching out to a cause, or you are having conversations, you're very strategic about what you can take on. I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and I'm all for supporting a cause, but we want to think about longevity, and we want to think about stamina. This is a fight. This has been a fight that's been going on for a long time. And, this farmers protest, I know from our SOCH perspective, we've started the conversation about the mental health of farmers and how much they're impacted by addictions, by depression, by suicide. Some are genetic factors, but some are, your economics and how the structure in the community is that helping your mental health thrive. So I think we can go on and on and on, but our main message for youth, for adults, for seniors, for everyone is it's okay if you're impacted. It's okay if you're feeling anxious and you're feeling hopeless. But if it's to a point you can't cope, you need to reach out for help. And there's no shame in that. There is no shame in getting support, because we're human. And sometimes our emotions and our thought process and the way we cope, it's not healthy. We haven't been taught any different.
It's really valuable, really valuable. And one thing I would say to people maybe of the older generation, even our generation, that youngsters might be hungry for information. Don't shout them down. If they don't know, tell them with Biard and love and guide them, because we don't want to alienate a generation where they're scared to ask for fear of getting it wrong. So you can't be disrespectful to somebody if you don't know any different, right? So I think that's really important point that you have raised there, that people should be able to speak to somebody and don't be scared to ask, what is this about? Coming on to your second point now.
I was just going to add, like, even for people that have a platform, right, which I've been seeing on social media, people are investing and they're being intentional about getting the right information and sharing it, because youth that are now following those platforms are getting the right information. So I think this is where the community can come together and really be powerful in amplifying messages that are accurate, because there's a lot of misinformation that can be out there and it can be misleading. And you don't want to be at a point where now you're like, oh, this has been going on for so long. I don't know what's going on, but I don't want to ask because someone's going to be like, what do you mean you don't know? Right. So I loved how you said that, like, for the older generation, talk to your younger generation, bring with Biad, because information is power. Knowledge is truly power.
Absolutely, 100%. And just picking up on your second point there, Maneet, about the generations that have dealt with trauma. So some of the people that are actually on the ground right now, we have a generation that have probably seen the tail end of the partition in the 40s, 50s. And then we've got the emergency that happened across India. So they've lived through that in the 60s. They've lived through the Green Revolution in the 70s. And then most people know about the turmoil and the bloodshed of 84 and, the 80s. And then more recently, we've had the drug being pushed in Punjab. So they've lived through all those traumas. And now, in their twilight years, they're on the ground in Delhi fighting for their future generations. I mean, that alone would just be enough to destroy someone's mental well-being, wouldn't it? It's so challenging. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe just me might want to add to that.
Yeah, for sure. No, definitely. Kind of like adding to what Monique was saying, right? Like, and what you were saying, that if one individual, if you take it for example, or even one generation goes through so many challenges, so many difficulties, they also need that opportunity and that space to deconstruct everything that they've gone through. But that doesn't always happen in general society. And if we're specifically talking about the South Asian community, we are aware that there's such a huge stigma, and we don't take the time to focus on ourselves or to talk about our emotions or, okay, these are the things that we've gone through. How has that impacted me? How has that impacted my mind and my thoughts? And then what is that trickle down effect to my family, my social circle, all of that and beyond. So I think definitely for sure, intergenerational trauma is a huge thing that we also need to educate ourselves on. There's not a lot of knowledge about that, I think, within our community, but like Maneet said, there's so much information out there. And if we can channel that information to increase our knowledge and our education, knowledge is power. So I'd highly encourage anyone that's watching this to learn about intergenerational trauma, to learn how that can impact you, because talking about it, acknowledging it, you also need to do that by having the correct information. And then by creating that space where you yourself can start to acknowledge, this is how I'm feeling. So validating your feelings is very important. So before we start to go help others, like I said before, you need to start with your own SOCH. So validating that, yes, I might be feeling anxious, I might be worried, I'm concerned about what's going on back in India, whereas I am here, part of the Sikh Punjabi diaspora community in the UK, US, wherever. I can't physically be there. So these are the feelings that I'm feeling. And we understand that if you've never actually sat and validated your feelings, that this is a very foreign concept. It can be challenging to just sit there and be like, I'm uncomfortable, right? Who wants to feel sad and upset and angry and hurt? Nobody. But it's part of that process. To break that intergenerational trauma, we need to accept our feelings. So one tip for that, and it kind of goes back to what Maneet was saying, a mindful morning. If you've never had any sort of mindful practice, even if you start the day off by waking up and not touching your phone, right? You can sit there and for 1 minute, you could even put a timer on and just sit there and breathe. That's all we're asking, right? Because how many people actually sit there and focus on your breathing? And when you're feeling upset and anxious and angry and whatnot, your breathing is the first thing to go. So we encourage you to sit for just 1 minute and breathe. And then you can even practice that the next day, the day after, increase it from 1 minute to 2 to 3. So that way you're not putting too much pressure on yourself. So that's one way that you can start to acknowledge and validate your feelings. Even writing things down, right? Like we know everything that's going on in our minds, but if we're actually able to put it on paper, it's a whole different concept. You can go back to that piece of paper and be like, oh, okay, this is how I was feeling before. Now this is how I'm feeling maybe a few days later. Has anything changed? Are things the same? So writing things down is also very helpful. And with that, I know journaling can sound like really strange to people and can sound overwhelming. You could even start by saying, today I woke up and I had breakfast. Keep it simple. That's what we're really recommending. Simplify it, but start to focus on yourself. And then once you get a grasp on how you're feeling, then you can start to have these conversations with other people as well. Someone that is willing to listen to you, that is understanding. Because we understand that when you want to speak about your mental health and what's going on, you can't just speak to anybody. You have to have somebody that you are trusting and you have that relationship with. So those are just some of the tips that I can think of to, start to break that intergenerational trauma, because it really starts with you and the things that you are doing now. That is going to have an impact on your own life and the generations to come from you.
Thank you. That's so helpful. I've got to admit, I hadn't even heard of the phrase intergenerational trauma until Monique mentioned it to me last night, and then instantly it just fitted. And then I just reflected on, as I say, those people that are sitting on the ground and everything they lived through. And I just thought, whoa, the trauma that they probably haven't even addressed, right? Because they've just gone from one thing to another and another. So, so just coming back to Delhi, I mean, at the moment, we're in this situation, we've got this protest, we've got these people living in these very difficult situations, trying to keep, well, they are keeping in Chandigarh and they're doing really well. And, even despite the struggles that they're facing, they're fighting for their cause and they're fighting for their livelihoods, really. So it's a huge fight. And they don't have a choice, really, do they? This is their last fight, probably. And the anger that I'm hearing from a lot of people that I'm speaking to, and the messages that I received following my post, is that they feel bullied by the government, that they're being ignored, and as if somehow their lives don't matter as much as somebody else's, or that their cause is not worthy of even being acknowledged, that they're there. And I think that's something that people are really struggling to come to terms with. Why is this not even being acknowledged? And then on top of that, the media portrayal, the negative propaganda that we're seeing, that somehow these are terrorists, these are not real farmers, they're renter bodies, out protesting. So that belittlement of people, I think, is making people angry and frustrated, which are all valid feelings, aren't they? If we're in that situation, do you think?
I think, this is where it's really important because, I know for myself and Jasmine, we're not there on the ground, right? And I think this is where credible information is so critical and so crucial. Where are you getting your sources of information from? But, if any person who's watching this today, if you put yourself in an environment or a community where you feel like the governing body is not for your own mental well-being, and you have that sense of loss of control, I think it resonates on how you're feeling and how you're reacting and how you're responding. So I think to that, a lot of people, until you're not in a situation, you don't know how you're going to react. For them right now, it's survival mode. So, if you were to ask us, what kind of mental health tips would you have for people on the ground? I'm not entirely sure I would have the right answer per se. And I think with us, yes, we're professionals, but I think lived experience speaks volumes. That person who's been part of a protest and has fought the fight before in other situations, would probably speak more to how do I get through this? How long is this going to be? But I think one thing that I can speak that I know is valuable to people's mental health, and it's community. And I know we've been, kind of resonating on that message a lot today, is living in Chardi Kala. And I think that's the one thing that makes me so proud on being a Sikh, is that we have community. If there is a storm and someone needs help, we all go running. And that's kind of, our foundation for SOCH and why we started SOCH. We looked at other communities and we're like, our South Asian community, it doesn't matter which religion you're part of, but our overall bigger South Asian community, what we do is we help each other, and we are very community based. So, if you're on the grounds and someone's on the grounds, reach out to them, give them support, because I think that's where we can channel our love and give them that motivation, because one person's energy can feed another person to continue to be motivated. And you're hearing, I know from my family, hearing amazing stories that people are taking turns from different bins and villages to go to the forefront. And in the interim, other community members are taking care of their farmland and their household and their day-to-day. And that is community. So I think these are stories of hope. And that's what, people should be pushing forward, because I think it gives you more inspiration and it gives you light. But, even in all of this, if you're still in the darkness, you're unable to cope, our main message is, get informed. Understand that, you have a brain, we have emotions, we can feel up and down, and it's on a continuum. On our website, sochmentalhealth.com, we have, a number of episodes we did with the Sikh channel called Apni Soch, and we cover various different topics. Those are actually in Punjabi. But even on social media, we're constantly trying to educate and give people information on how can you help yourself. But if it comes to a point that those strategies are not working, reach out for professional support. And I think right now with the pandemic, the one nice thing is there's so much support available virtually. It's absolutely incredible, where you would have to wait or you'd have to go drive. You can actually, for instance, reach out to a therapist online and connect to someone. I know here at SOCH, we also have a lot of online forums right now, which are free to the community. Like we have a men's forum, a women's forum. So, come to these spaces. I think as a community member, it's also on you to be responsible to your health and get help. take that step, talk to your family doctor. And if you're feeling lost, email us at SOCH at info@sochmentalhealth.com, and we can give you supports on how to get connected. But our website, under resources, we have a lot of links, local and international information on where do you start, who can you reach out to. And even in the UK, there's a few organizations. Taraqi is one, and there's also Sick Your Mind. Two organizations just the top of our head are that have incredible resources, can connect you to support, or you can be part of their social circle and just go somewhere where you feel like you belong and you can relieve what you're feeling. I think in talking, there's a lot of healing in talking and supporting each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know personally, I feel a lot better talking to you two today. It's exploring what's going on deep in your mind, isn't it? And just unraveling some of those feelings, I think, is really helpful. So, just on a positive note, so hopefully things will turn out the way we all want them to, and this battle that people are fighting, it will give a good result. And that those people that, as I say, are in their twilight years and fighting this last battle, they'll find some peace in this big fight, right? And hopefully we'll have some happy news soon. Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. That's been so valuable, and I'm sure people will want more. I think it's really going to help a lot of people just understand and just, as I say, unravel some of those feelings that they're experiencing at the moment. Thank you so much.